healthy ways of self-regulation and how to pivot when you're seeing yourself going back to that same pattern. Let's start with self-regulation. First of all, what you're asking and the way that you're asking it shows that you're already ahead of the vast majority of people. More people need to realize that self-regulation is one of the ultimate skills for the modern individual to learn in this age of overstimulation and distraction and dysregulation. But here is the very first step that I would say. The first step is for us to distinguish self-regulation from mindfulness, because a lot of people mix those two up. I don't want now to engage in defining what mindfulness is, because that would make this a 1 hour response. So let me start by saying just mindfulness and what we traditionally consider as mindfulness practices, that is not the same as self-regulation, and self-regulation isn't mindfulness. There is some overlap, but those two are not the same. Why is this important to say? Because people are quick to assume that when we want to engage in self-regulation, when we want to develop the skill of self-regulation, our only option is traditional mindfulness practices. That is what? Meditation and potentially breathwork or maybe yoga. And that's where people think their options stop. They think their options are limited to those traditional mindfulness practices, mostly inspired by Eastern philosophies. And although those practices are incredible and amazing for different things, they're not necessarily always good for self-regulation, and they are certainly not our only options. In fact, those practices can sometimes be counterproductive. So I worked with many people for whom meditation was providing opposite of self-regulation, and I was one of those people. So let's imagine that we have a person who has a very restless mind and is struggling with intrusive thoughts. So you want to tell me that when that person is feeling overwhelmed, they should go in a room, close themselves in a room in complete silence and sit alone and do nothing and just observe and listen to their own thoughts. That is literally like giving a megaphone to their intrusive thoughts. So it's opposite of self-regulation. Now, I'm not saying that we should not strive to gradually and slowly but surely develop our capacity to sit with our uncomfortable thoughts and emotions in order to process them better and in order to learn some things from them. I'm advocating always for developing that skill, but that is completely different from self-regulation. Self-regulation is about helping you in this moment. Self-regulation is about bringing yourself back to baseline or as close to the baseline as possible so that you can re-engage in your day and do the things that you want to do in this day and engage with the external world. That's what self-regulation is. The capacity to sit with your own thoughts and to confront extremely uncomfortable and troubling thoughts and emotions is something else. I'm not dismissing the value of it, but it doesn't have space in the conversation about self-regulation. Or if it does have space, it's nowhere near the top of our priority list. So what do we want? We want activities that are actually going to bring us back to baseline. Now, for some people who've been, let's say, meditating for years, or whose mind isn't so restless, who are not struggling so much with intrusive thoughts, but are maybe feeling slightly overwhelmed, for them, meditation can be perfect and can do wonders. But once again, I'm saying there are so many people and so many different scenarios where meditation isn't helpful and even can be counterproductive when talking about trying to self-regulate. So then, what are the things that we should learn or should engage in or can engage in to practice self-regulation? Well, the options are almost endless. Precisely because all of us are unique individuals. And precisely because all of us, no matter how similar, are still different from each other, it means that for different people, different self-regulation practices will work. Some of the universal ones are walking. I would say that's number one, and that's the safest bet for most people. The vast majority of people, if they go on a walk, and especially on a walk without additional stimulation, meaning without music. Maybe some very, very calm music. Definitely not something to hype you up. Definitely not a podcast. You don't need to be listening to someone else's thoughts and opinions. So, at most, calm, low tempo, chill music. At most. Preferably nothing. No stimulation. So, going on a walk is going to be, for most people, one of the safest bets. That is one of the surest ways to self-regulate. Another one that works for a lot of people is journaling. It can be free flow journaling. It can be using certain prompts. Some overlooked, I would say, are drawing or doodling, or maybe you're actually proficient so you can engage in painting, but some form of creative expression. If you know how to play an instrument, that can be a great one. Dancing, regardless of you, if you can or cannot dance. When it comes to self-regulation, there is no such thing as good dancer or a bad dancer. It's about letting your body move and releasing some energy through your body. So it can be not just walking, but dancing. It can be rope skipping. That's what I do sometimes. My number one is definitely walking. Rope skipping can be great. So different forms of movement, but I would say not overly intense movement. So yeah, it can be a temporary solution. Sometimes it can work to engage in an intense workout, and I used to do that, but I can tell you, from years and years of trying different things and different forms of self-regulation, intense workout is the most deceiving attempt at self-regulation out of all healthy habits. I don't want to compare it to self-destructive habits, but from all the healthy habits, intense workout is the most deceiving. So I would actually prefer you to engage in slow, controlled movement, or dance, or rope skipping, or playing some form of more free movement that isn't so much about putting strain on your body. Already this is showing you that options are broad, but let me add some other things. You can have an ice cream. You can watch a couple of episodes of your favorite show. You have some chocolate. And these are the things that are interesting because usually we consider them as not healthy, not productive, and we don't even think of them as part of the conversation of healthy ways of self-regulation. And that's a mistake. Let's draw a comparison. I can actually eat an ice cream, and that can be a healthy form of self-regulation. I can watch 2 or 3 episodes of anime, and that can be healthy form of self-regulation. I can, eat a couple of pieces of dark chocolate or any type of chocolate or any candy. Doesn't matter what the ingredients are. And it can be a healthy form of self-regulation. However, if I spend the whole night binge watching 1 or 2 seasons of anime and I eat a whole pizza and a jar of peanut butter and I eat a whole loaf of bread with that peanut butter, and just go on a whole binging spree of indulging in entertainment and food, binge eating, that's a maladaptive attempt at self-soothing or maladaptive attempt at self-regulation. Self-soothing and self-regulation aren't necessarily the same, but we can use both in this context. Self-soothing leads to self-regulation. So let's say that self-regulation is a broader term than self-soothing, but that's not important right now. The important point is that we have so many of these activities that are potentially healthy ways of self-soothing and self-regulating. However, they get a bad reputation because most of the times people take them too far and they end up being maladaptive attempts at self-soothing or self-regulation. Because we don't hear too often about someone going on a binge journaling spree and writing 60 pages and then, sharing that with people, and people say, oh, journaling is a bad form of self-regulation, or someone going on a 50-kilometer walk. That doesn't usually happen. So because these activities are slightly easier to indulge in, such as food and entertainment, then we view them as exclusively negative. But that's not the case. Once again, if you recognize that you have the ability to manage, and clearly not all of us have that ability developed to the same extent, but if you work on developing your ability to manage how you engage in different forms of self-regulation, ice cream, TV shows, chocolate, your favorite beverage can be actually small but valuable self-soothing and self-regulation rituals. So where does all of this lead to? It leads to the fact that you have to experiment. You have to experiment, and it would be unfair towards yourself to limit your journey of learning how to self-regulate, to limit it to meditation and journaling and walking, even though, again, those three, especially the latter two, can be beneficial for most people. So you have to expand, you have to experiment, you have to try out different things. And I would say, now make a commitment to every week try 2 or 3 different ways of self-regulation and see how they suit you. You see how well you can manage them. Don't consider anime your form of self-regulation if you cannot stop at watching 2 or 3 episodes. Then it's not for you at this point in your life. So that's the first part of the question, or the first question, that's self-regulation. Now when it comes to, let me just check it was how to pivot, interesting phrasing, how to pivot when you're seeing yourself going back to the same pattern. Well, here's the thing. First, your question implies that you already possess the most important part of the solution, and that is self-awareness, because you're seeing yourself going back to the same pattern. So your self-awareness is developed enough where you can notice yourself falling back into that same pattern that can be, let's say, self-destructive, unhealthy, self-defeating, overall just undesirable. So because self-awareness is by far the most important step, and it's the first step, you just even saying that you see yourself falling back into it means that you have the first and most important step taken care of, at least to some extent. I'm not saying you don't need to develop your self-awareness further, but let's say that decent amount of times, decent percentage of times, you can observe yourself going back to that pattern. And then what's the next step? The next step has to do with one of unique human capacities, one of the things that separates us from animals, and that is creating a pause or creating a break. What do I mean by this? Well, one of the things that separates us from animals, or from other animals, however you want to look at us, as part of the animal family or outside of it, either way, one of the things that separates us from animals is our capacity to pause between stimulus and response. You'll see this in existential psychology, or in existential/existentialist writing a lot. Viktor Frankl may be the most mainstream person who wrote about our capacity to pause between stimulus and response. Someone who also wrote about it a lot is Rollo May, one of my great inspirations. And here it is, The Art of Counseling by Rollo May. He talks about it here. Here is Meaning of Anxiety, also by Rollo May. He talks about it in this book as well. And your capacity to pause, your capacity to create that break, that pause between stimulus and response, is one of the most important, unique human capacities. What does that mean? First step, your awareness. You're noticing yourself going back to that pattern. Then you have to utilize your capacity to pause. How do you pause? Now we are kind of back to the conversation of self-regulation. Usually, when we are going back to that pattern, we are overwhelmed and we are not at our most regulated. So this is the opportunity to bring self-regulation into this conversation. That's why your questions, even though I consider them separate, are very much connected. Now we can go for a walk. Now we can journal. Now we can do some deep breathing. We can talk to a friend. Or if us not falling into the same pattern involves not falling into the pattern of a hostile and unhealthy discussion with a loved one, then we have to find someone else to talk to. So creating this break, this pause between stimulus and response, is related to self-regulation. It doesn't have to be exactly the same, but it can include a lot of those similar practices and similar activities. So awareness, pausing, creating a break. So this break is taking you out of automatic response, automatic behavior, automatic processing. It's taking you out of it, and is putting you at a uniquely human position. Again, one of the most unique and one of the most beautiful capacities, and that is to not be like an animal acting solely on instinct, but actually stop, process, reflect, think, feel, let the feelings run through you instead of feelings controlling you completely. Let the thoughts run through you instead of controlling you completely. And this doesn't mean you will be 100% successful at all times. But how about you become slightly better at noticing, that is awareness, slightly better at noticing yourself falling into the same pattern. You become slightly better at pausing. You become slightly better at making that pause longer. And you become slightly better of returning into your life, into the world, into that situation in a more calmer, and maybe it's not about being calm, in a more grounded and present state. So yeah, once again, if you can observe yourself and if you can see yourself falling back into that same pattern, you should be encouraged, because you are already taken care of by far the most important thing. Now start practicing your capacity that's been given to you, however you want to consider it, given to you by nature, by universe, by God, but it's one of the most impressive, one of the most glorious human capacities, and that's that pause. So use it well.